We now come to the matter of reports. The valuation report is really your window into the client's world. It's what you use to display your work. It's also a legal document that you will have to defend in court on occasions. And so it needs to be well presented, both in terms of its content and structure, so that it communicates a convincing valuation story or argument, leading to an easy to accept valuation conclusion. It's also useful to ensure that it has a professional profile, a professional appearance. And this means neither too simple, like it's just been done on a cheap typewriter, or too complex, where you have too many tizzy bits and pieces and bags of money in the corner of the page and clip art and whatnot. You need to be professional. The best way to get an idea overall of how to write reports is to read them. And to help you do that, on the module you'll find there's a handful of examples. If you have access to other examples, perhaps through your work or other connections, it's also useful to read those. Not just to read them simply and like you'd read a morning newspaper, but read them critically. Ask yourself the question, has this really convinced me of the valuation conclusion that the report leads me to? Are there things which I would think are missing that should be there? And especially now that you've studied a bit of valuation, you've got an idea of what you would like to see to be convinced of a valuation. The other side is, has the report got in it too much? Has it gone to 200 pages because the valuer has simply padded it up with a big part of the local telephone book or something? You'll find reports like that from time to time. And so getting an idea of the practicalities of report writing, both from a structural intellectual content and also from an aesthetic presentation content, about the best way to move forward is to read as many as you can. In the study guide, I recommend that you read Whipple's chapter on reports because that's quite good, and also the API practice guide. And you'll find there's quite a section on report writing in that. They're quite important to read. The study guide, of course, more or less summarizes both of them and puts in some more practical content. And so hopefully the study guide should be your navigation through this topic. It gives you a number of examples, but also gives you the criteria, the key contents, and the key considerations that you need. The other thing you'll find in the study guide is that we go through the different types of reports. There's more than one type of valuation report. And the reason for this is that there's more than one type of client and client needs. The normal reference report or form of communication of your valuation argument is what we call formally a comprehensive report, sometimes called a long form report. So your long form report is the complete argument. It should be the valuer's opportunity to show what data and information was used, what starting points, what premises are being used, and also the intellectual processes that have gone on to arrive at the conclusion, the valuation conclusion. And so in the comprehensive report, it should be quite evident that there is a structured argument. Now, there's a lot of mathematics in this, so it's not quite like a philosophical argument, but it basically achieves the same thing. It should gently, but definitely, lead the client, the reader, from beginning to end, where you begin by stating the generalities, the data that you're using, the expectations that you and your client have, and then through a structured analysis of the information available, maybe an outline of the methods and approaches that are being used, to a conclusion which by the time the client or any other reader gets to it, they should say, yes, it can't be anything else. The amount of content and detail is partly a matter of personal taste. And, well, maybe not personal taste, but the opinion of the individual valuer, the report writer, as to what will be appropriate to achieve that end. Again, not too light, not too heavy. It should be written so that a non-specialist reader can follow it, so there's no point in putting complex mathematics or detailed explanations that rely on the kind of the internal property world jargon when your readers are likely not going to be property people. That's the comprehensive report. The comprehensive report these days usually begins with what's called an executive summary. Now, some people don't quite understand what an executive summary is. An executive summary is not an introduction. It's intended to be a complete summary of the argument that is in the body of the report. And so that should take the reader quickly through every major heading, if you like, every major element in the intellectual process that goes from the valuation question to the valuation conclusion. The advantage of the executive summary is that the reader is able to very quickly acquire an understanding of how the valuation was done, why it came to the conclusions that it did, and what the conclusion was. Now, you'll notice in the study guide we mentioned that it's important that you don't sign any of these summaries, and the reason is that that would or could be taken as the complete report. And so if you have a 1.5 or 2 page executive summary and you get down to a valuation figure and underneath that you sign it off, those 2 pages can be taken as the entire report. That can expose you to a lot of litigation if there's critical details in the body of the report that aren't exposed or explained entirely in the executive summary. So it's important that's not done. You'll also notice in the study guide that we talk about letters of transmittal. Now, letters of transmittal used to be very common, especially when valuation reports were transmitted by mail. And so it was a polite way of introducing the valuation, and it looked very much like an executive summary. In the United States, the letters of transmittal often are signed in the way that you'd sign any other letter. In Australia, that's considered to be a dangerous practice, because if you have both a signature and a valuation figure in the same place, then it constitutes a complete valuation. And again, you have the litigation risk. And so we have the comprehensive report with the letter of transmittal, perhaps. These days, executive summaries and electronically transmitted comprehensive reports tend to do the job of the letter of transmittal. A lot of clients do not want an entire comprehensive report. In fact, these days they're getting to the point where for a lot of the more regular work, they don't really want to have to pay a valuer to go and bother with an inspection either. And so this means there's a lot of abbreviation, principally in the area of valuations for mortgage purposes done by banks. Very large volume of work, very standard valuation project, and the banks simply want to be able to have a bit of comfort when it comes to knowing that they're lending the right amount for a particular property. They're not really that interested in the precise valuation, and if there's some uncertainty introduced as a result of not doing the inspection, from the bank's point of view, that risk is relatively minor compared to the money that they save. And so there's a push for short form reports and desktop valuations. Short form report looks like an executive summary with a signature and nothing else, because it consists of a couple of pages, a very brief outline of the valuation with the valuation figure, without any great depth in terms of explaining the rationale of the valuation. And we explain the pros and cons of those. You'll also find in the study guide we go over the various elements that you're likely to find in a report, and so it's useful to read through those, whether or not to use exhibits or appendices, where you get the various materials from, say sitemaps and so on, and a number of other details. Overall, it still comes down to common sense and a certain amount of professional finesse when it comes to writing your reports. And so consider the study guide more as a set of principles and bullet points to note, if you like, when appraising the quality of report and when deciding how to write one for yourself. I do recommend that after you've taken the time to go through the study guide and read the readings that we're recommending, then go through and look at these reports and check for yourself whether they come up to speed. Some of them do not follow all of the recommendations that you find in the study guide and in Whipple and so on. And so it's an opportunity to do a little bit of detective work. See whether they're as good as they should be, whether they could be better, how could you improve the practice. Once you've finished that, what I'd like you to do is go onto the discussion board and post your own comments and what you consider to be the good points, the bad points, the weaknesses and the strengths of the different reports you're looking at. And you can look particularly at things like, do they have the right balance of inclusion, the right amount of information and complexity? Do they present more complex mathematics than is necessary, or do they leave out too much? Also may like to comment on the use of disclaimers, whether you think it's overdone, whether you think they're effective or not. Overall, this is a very practical module, but one which is going to be very important for your professional lives and also rather important for the assignment that by now you should be well into.